So this is funny to me because I know people have strong opinions or they don't care
It's
about
funny to
Colin
me.
Moriarty, but he is a Sony guy. Like his whole thing is sacred symbols. It's all about PlayStation. He's always been a PlayStation guy.
Yep.
He kind of made his money, made his name at IGN being the PlayStation guy, the Podcast Beyond guy. He's a
Yeah.
Sony guy. And
sure.
but he's also never minced words when Sony does something stupid. Like when I've listened to him, like he's pretty fair when it's something stupid, and also defends them when everyone's calling it stupid. But he's like, it's not, and here's why. So I don't always like everything he says, but generally speaking, he's very smart and logical with his takes on this stuff.
He is.
And he's got connections still, despite his kind of being kicked out of the mainstream of a lot of gaming media. He still has a lot of connections. So here's what he said on this podcast, and he also tweeted this. Whatever it is called, Xdit. I don't know what you call it now, but he says, I spoke extensively with someone who worked on Concord, and it's so much worse than you think. That's a great way to start, by the way.
No.
He said, internally, it was referred to as the future of PlayStation with Star Wars-like potential and a dev culture of toxic positivity. We'll talk about that in a minute. Halted any negative feedback.
I like that.
So there's no negative feedback that was allowed, essentially, for it. And the
Jeez.
costs overall were up to $400 million. And it was reported that at least half, probably more, was funded by Sony after they purchased Firewalk Studio. So bare minimum, Sony spent $200 million on this, but most estimates are saying it's probably closer to 300 because they didn't. It's not like they spent nothing before they acquired the studio. They were already working alongside with them and supporting it. So it's by far the most expensive game Sony has ever published. First or second party.
$400 million.
And not only is it the most expensive game they've ever published, like think about Colin was saying this based on his estimates and his connections internally. Spider-Man 3 is probably going to be 300 to 350 million to make, which is an insane budget. That's a totally different conversation. I think game budgets are out of control personally, but that's a different conversation. This costs more than Spider-Man 3 will cost, Last of Us Part 3 will cost, with if they make that. Like any of these other major IPs. The next Uncharted game will cost. It costs more than all of those. And so here's what I wanted to just throw to you guys real quick. And I know that it's easy because Colin's a pretty pessimistic person. He'll call himself honest and realist, and I get that. But I think he's historically been pretty negative compared to like Greg, who's overly positive, which is why they always made a compelling duo, in my opinion. And they've leaned into that a bit as they've gone their separate ways. Greg is still weirdly overly positive about everything. Not everything's great, Greg. Relax. And not everything's bad, Colin. Relax. So, but toxic positivity is a funny phrase to me. I actually think there's some to that. What do you guys think about that?
So that really struck me when I read that tweet by him and everything, and that's something I don't think you hear a lot is toxic positivity. So when you're talking like corporations and larger things like that, like I work as part of a larger corporation. Culture is always something that comes up in that, and the atmosphere that you provide and expect people to work and perform under. Toxic positivity isn't something I ever considered being an issue, and how they describe it here, just basically blocking out any feedback. They don't want any negativity, but they're really just kind of cutting themselves off completely from making this a better product at that point. Because if you think you're just the cat's meow and you don't allow any open conversation, you're going to get a pretty one-sided view of things.
Yeah.
And I can see just.
This is where I feel like, because I know, Dan, you had some thoughts about why it did or didn't work. And I don't know if I totally agree that the woke elements of it, the diversity elements of it, whatever you want to call it, I don't know that kept people from buying it. But the more I've thought about it, I thought about what you said, and I've seen other reactions to it. I don't think it helped, but I don't think that was the reason that it didn't do well.
I wasn't saying it was the reason. It was definitely a part of it.
You made a good case for like why it stood out to people. But here's the danger. There's so many positive things, by the way, just to be really clear, about making sure that as many different cultures and people and backgrounds feel represent. Like, I think that's important. I have no problem with that. But when it's done to the point where you can't even give criticism in a workplace because now it's going to sound like you might be bigoted or racist because you don't like an idea from a certain person or group, or that, like, to me, that's where it becomes toxic, because now you have to be like, oh, I have to support this or I'm going to be labeled something and maybe lose my job. I think that's a problem, legitimately.
Yeah, that's the bigger problem there. I mean, is the, it does create that where you're going to be ostracized or potentially even let go because it's not that you're not a part of the agenda or wanting to progress things, but having any type of criticism, feedback. I mean, if you can't express that's a dangerous environment.
And ironically enough,
for creativity.
Most people don't want to be patronized and not criticized just because they're part of a certain group or whatever, a culture, a background. Some people maybe do. Some people want special treatment. I think they're a problem. But most human beings that I've encountered of any ethnic or religious or whatever background, they just want to be treated equal to you and talked to normally like you would be. They want to be partners and work together. Like, they don't want to be treated specially or patronized for sure. Like, oh, that was your idea? Well, then I love it. I love that idea. Like, we should totally do that. Like, they don't want that. That's belittling and patronizing. So that's what I envision. And I know that's probably a dramatized version of this. But if you're in an environment where you feel like, I've got a lot of thoughts, but crap, I'm not going to say this. Are you kidding me? I'm not going to say that. Like, I don't want to be the guy who says it and has to go find work elsewhere. Pass. I'd rather be part of a team that puts out a crappy game than speak up. That to me,
at least you're getting paid.
Yeah. But go ahead.
I think there's also, it's like it. And I don't know if they got into specifics, if it was more kind of like, was it management that was kind of trying to shut everybody out and trying to bear down on everybody and be like, no negativity, no criticism.
Right?
I mean,
that's where it starts.
That's where it starts.
Right, and it
starts with the leadership, and that's the mentality that's being set. So it's got to be their leadership that had this culture.
Yeah, I used to have friends who worked at Best Buy, and they said, they described it without using this phrase, but it sounded like, at least at the time they were there, this was like late 90s, early 2000s, there was a lot of toxic positivity. You had to like gather around for a big rah-rah session, and you had to be all gung-ho and like chant things about how awesome Best Buy was, and like you couldn't be negative. You couldn't be negative.
No, like Walmart, Target, they all do the same thing.
And not even negative, but you couldn't even offer suggestions for improvement. Let's even say that. Like, there was no room to improve because everyone involved is so great. And I think regardless of whether it involves a diversity issue or not, I think there's something here where it's like, if you're in an environment where you can't add feedback or input or opportunities for improvement, then why do you even have me hired here? Like, what am I here for?
Exactly. I mean, it just takes away the voice of anybody else. I mean, if that's the leadership message, then they don't want to hear what you have to say.
I only obviously work at the one place that I work at, and maybe I'm just crazy, but I feel like all corporations are like this, right? I mean,
most big ones can be, for sure.
Yeah, like definitely the bigger the corporation, the more people you're going to have at the top, right? Because you just have there's so many employees, there's so many different things going on. You're going to need more people at the top, doing their puppeteering and blah blah blah.
But I do think this was specific to the dev team. Though. This said the dev culture was toxic positivity.
Sure.
Yeah. So this is who is leading the studio. This is the development studio head's problem.
I mean, and again, I'm not always trying to be that person, but I coming across as cynical of people at the top, but I really do feel like more often than not, like, all these guys with their 6-7 figure salaries to me are the problem. Like, they live in la la land, making their big bucks. They don't have to wake up every day and be as stressed out as all of us regular people. And they can just sit there and shove their bullshit down our throats and their toxic positivity, because to them it's like, well, I make the big bucks and I'm going to create the ideas. So we're going to do the ideas that I think because I make this money and I'm smart. So
there's something to that.
And it's just gross.
Yeah, it is, but like, really, like, if you're getting into those type of cultures, that's just poor leadership at those levels, and it is very rampant in corporate America. I mean,
let's say that the suits weren't involved, just for hypothetical. But you're right, Dan. Like, typically when they are involved, it's a problem, and I'm with you. But let's just pretend for hypothetical that they weren't, and this was really at the dev level. It still is enabled by those who are in charge. So even if those in charge weren't directly saying, hey, don't criticize, like, maybe they'd be like, what? Yeah. Yes, please criticize. We want a good product. Maybe they would say that. I don't know.
Sure.
But if they enable those who are developing it to have so much authority over their coworkers, colleagues, and teammates that to the extent that you can't even speak up. Like, for example, there are some characters, actually multiple. I looked after we talked about it. I was like, am I just repeating what I've heard or read? And I'm not. So I looked into it. I looked at the characters. I watched the video of the gameplay, and I feel like I still stand 100%. It seems like a pretty slow, boring version of Overwatch, which I already don't like for me personally.
Sure.
I've heard a lot of folks say it actually doesn't play all that great, and it's inconsistent depending on who you pick. And the character designs, there were probably one or two that I thought, that one's kind of cool. That one's interesting. That one's unique. Most of them I thought were derivative and lazy and just not interesting. And the problem is when you criticize design, it's way different. Like if you were to say, hey, this gun doesn't feel right, I think you could probably talk about that and fix the gun. But if you say that character design is a little derivative, now you're
the look of the person.
That's a different conversation then.
Yeah. And I think it's just part, again, these are all just pieces and parts of it.
Well,
Colin in his podcast talked about how
I think it does start at the top though. It's dollars and cents, and it is the directive that's being given from these corporate leaders.
It's a reflection of what you're saying, because it becomes then you're insulting what is the reflection of the people that they're trying to base that around, right?
Correct.
Because that's what the whole representation of like I want representation. I want representation. Why doesn't this game have representation? And then you go to critique it in any way, sorry. Yeah. And then it becomes a problem because it's like, well, then you start taking it personally because it's like, well, now you're attacking me because this is a representation of me. It's like, but hold on, you need to relax. This is just a video game. Like, why are you taking this so personally? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, these are just literally digitized characters. These are ones and zeros at the end of the day.
Also, listen, design is a cutthroat world to be in. Like, I feel for people who are in design for their living because they have to have such thick skin. They have to develop thick skin because no one's happy with your first stab at a design. Very, very rarely are they happy with your so like design is already tough. And so if you're already in a position where people are afraid to give you feedback on it, so it moves ahead without any actual feedback because no one wants to be that person who criticized a thing that you're supposed to be really sensitive about. Well, there you go. Then you get what we got. Colin did also talk about it. It's not all of these are just little pieces to a big puzzle, right? The leadership, that's probably a handful of pieces. In toxic positivity, that's got to be some of the elements of it, but also Sony choosing to prioritize this in 2021. So it was already 5 years too late, and then they had 3 more years of $200 million worth of a continued investment. Like there are so many wrong pieces, like misunderstanding the genre, misunderstanding your audience, misunderstanding what makes a game good. They didn't even have the monetization piece like figured out. I remember Colin talking about this. Like they didn't have what it looks like for a new player to step in and create your character or pick your character, be introduced to the world. Like none of that stuff was set for until very recently. So, and that's why a lot of it felt kind of duct taped together in some ways, even though it has been in development for like 7 years.
So much money.
I know, and it's crazy to be in development for that long to launch with that kind of product. I mean, there's other studios that have the same issues, Final Fantasy, Halo, long development cycles, underperforming. It's just crazy to put that much money and time into something to have that end product. It's just
and it is also always different situations. But in this one, that's I don't know. That's just bonkers to me. And you know what? We always joke around about our Jimmy Ryan. Good old Jimmy Ryan, but all of this stuff seemed to a lot of this BS that's coming up and has popped up, all happening during the reign of Jimmy Ryan. So,
right. Yes. So it was a lot of his directive and his leadership that started them down this path. And, to take this long in this type of game and, and it just comes to corporations chasing those types of things, wanting to get that hero shooter type thing. Like you said, it's 6 years too late. And at this point, you got to have a really compelling product to compete with Overwatch and, the other players that are out there. This just didn't set itself apart in any significant way.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
Just crazy. That's a lot of money.
400
Yeah,
million
it's so
dollars.
much money. I mean, it's just crazy to think how much money you spend, and that's the final product. I mean, ultimately, it's a failureship of the leadership teams.
Yeah, I agree. We'll see what happens with this IP. I know that they're still not. It's not like officially dead in terms of
No,
like
it's going to come
they could
back
bring
free
it
to
back.
play. I mean,
Yeah.
I would guarantee it comes back free to play.
Yeah, and
Because at
it'll,
least you can get something from it, right? If anybody
And
likes
I
the
will
game, they'll
play it.
download
I will
like,
play it when it's free to play. I will download it. I'll give it a
Hey,
shot. But
they
like,
should also
I've
just
heard
like put it out on every platform, like put it on mobile,
Sure.
even like figure out a way to like get it out there.
No kidding.
recoup that 400 mil.
Recoup that money.
400. You got to do something at this point. Like launching on an Xbox isn't ludicrous at this point. You got to recoup something.
Agreed.
Sure.
Totally agree.